I never thought a simple mailbox could ruin my life. There I was, sipping coffee on my porch, watching the sunrise paint my little slice of freedom in golden hues when the mailbox dinged. At first, I didn't think much of it. Bills, junk mail, maybe a polite neighborly note. I was wrong, dead wrong. Inside that envelope was a formal letter stamped with something that sounded more serious than urgent: HOA notice of dues and eviction threat. I blinked at it like it had grown eyes and was judging me. Dues, eviction, I wasn't even in the HOA. My property was a solid stone, throw away from their perfectly manicured tyranny, a little patch of rebellion on the edge of their rulebook kingdom. I read the letter again. Yes, it explicitly demanded I pay dues immediately or face eviction. No explanation, no consideration, just a straight-up threat from some woman named Karen, apparently their president and the self-proclaimed keeper of order. I laughed at first. Who was this Karen? Was she going to storm my house with a gavel and a measuring tape? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I had worked hard for this little piece of land. My house was my fortress of freedom, painted in colors that would make any HOA blush: electric blue shutters, a bright yellow door, a garden that looked like it exploded in wildflowers. And now some clipboard-wielding tyrant thought she could dictate how I lived my life. I grabbed my phone and called the HOA number listed on the letter. A robotic voice guided me to a real human, or at least someone who sounded real. "This is Karen," she said, like I just walked into a courtroom drama instead of my own front yard. "You are in violation of HOA rules and must pay dues immediately." I tried reasoning with her. "I live outside the HOA boundaries," I said, smiling even though she couldn't see me. "I'm not a member, you can't just." "I don't care where you live," she cut me off, sharp as a stapler. "You are subject to our rules because, well, because we say so." I froze. For a second. I couldn't tell if she was serious or if this was some kind of performance art. Then I realized, nope, she was deadly serious. And that's when it hit me, this was going to be war. I decided to take a walk around my property, calming myself and thinking through options. My garden was thriving, my dog was digging new trenches, and my pirate ship playground swayed gently in the breeze. All of it, my little world of chaos and freedom, could be in danger if I didn't act. And then I noticed something else. From the corner of my eye, a car had stopped near the edge of my property. Two middle-aged men in crisp uniforms were scribbling in notebooks, looking way too official. My heart skipped a beat. Were they inspectors, private investigators, or worse, HOA enforcers on a mission? I waved, trying to mask my nervousness with casual friendliness. They didn't wave back. Instead, one of them tapped a device that beeped and started taking pictures of my pirate ship. That's when I understood. The first strike had already begun. I didn't panic, I laughed. I had to laugh because if I didn't, I might cry, or worse, call Karen and beg for mercy. "They think they can intimidate me," I muttered, packing between my neon garden gnome and a statue of a dragon I'd bought on sale. "They don't know who they're dealing with." And that's when I made my first decision. I was not paying a dime and I was not backing down. But as I watched those men continue to scrutinize my property like it was some kind of crime scene, I realized this wasn't going to be easy. HOAs were like wolves, organized, relentless, and somehow terrifyingly petty. And me? I was a lone homeowner on the edge of their world, about to find out just how far they would go to enforce their rule. Little did I know that letter was only the beginning. The war hadn't started yet, it had already begun. I didn't have to wait long to see Karen's invisible hand in action. The next morning, a black SUV rolled slowly down the gravel driveway. My heart sank a little, but I reminded myself I had rights, I had freedom, I had a pirate ship in my yard. That's when two men in crisp uniforms stepped out, clipboards in hand, looking like they were about to audit a nuclear facility instead of my backyard. "Good morning," I called out, trying to sound casual. "Can I help you?" They didn't answer immediately. One of them adjusted his sunglasses like he was auditioning for a police drama and said, "We're here on behalf of the HOA. We're inspecting your property." I blinked. Inspecting for what exactly? "Compliance with HOA regulations," the other man replied. His tone was flat, like reading from a teleprompter. I laughed, a short, bitter chuckle. "You do realize I don't belong to the HOA, right?" They ignored me and started walking toward my house. My dog, sensing my unease, began barking like we were under siege. That earned me a glare from the clipboard guy. Seriously, my dog was protecting our freedoms, someone should tell them. I followed them around the yard, mentally cataloging all the ways they could hate me. The neon blue shutters, the pirate ship leaning dangerously, the dragon statue mid-flight in my garden. The clipboard guy scribbled something furiously, occasionally glancing at me as if I were a suspect in a crime drama. After what felt like an eternity, I finally couldn't contain myself. So, are you going to issue me a citation for the dragon? Or is it the neon shutters? I can always repaint in beige, but the dragon is non-negotiable. He looked up dead serious. This is not a joke, you are subject to the rules whether you like it or not. I swallowed hard. That's when it clicked, these weren't just harmless bureaucrats. They were HOA enforcers and they had a mission. Suddenly, my neighbor across the street, mild-mannered Mr. Thompson, came out, holding a cup of coffee like he was an innocent bystander in a war zone. He whispered, "They've been doing this to everyone on the edge. Karen doesn't miss a chance to flex." I nodded, forcing a smile. Good to know I'm not alone in the rebellion. The inspection ended with the men taking photos of everything, from my crooked mailbox to the faintly terrifying scarecrow I'd planted as a joke. They left with the silent menace of a storm cloud, and I realized the first strike wasn't physical, it was psychological. Then came the phone call, Karen herself. I could practically hear her stepping on freshly polished floors, adjusting her perfectly ironed blazer. "I hear you've been uncooperative," she said. The words dripped with superiority, the kind that could make an entire neighborhood feel guilty for existing. "I'm just living my life," I said. "Outside the HOA, you can't." "You're outside the HOA, yes," she interrupted. "But you are still under our watch. That property of yours is an eyesore, a hazard, and a disturbance. Pay the dues or we escalate." My stomach twisted. Escalate how? Send a SWAT team to measure my hedges? Find me for being human? The absurdity of it all made me laugh out loud, half fear, half disbelief. But that's when I realized Karen was serious, dead serious. And if she had the audacity to make this call personally, it meant she wasn't just enforcing rules, she was waging a war of control. I paced my yard, looking at my neon shutters, the pirate ship, and the dragon mid-flight, and whispered to myself, "They think I'll cave. They have no idea who they're dealing with." And in that moment, a plan began to form. A mix of defiance, cleverness, and just a dash of chaos. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one my way on my terms. Little did I know, the first strike was only the opening salvo. The real battle was about to begin, and Karen had no idea how badly she had underestimated me. After the inspectors left, I knew something had to be done. Sitting on my porch, staring at my neon shutters, I felt a rush of defiance. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought a few suits with clipboards could scare a homeowner who built a pirate ship in his yard. They were wrong. I started small. First, the signs, big, bold, impossible to miss signs reading, "Private property, no HOA allowed," and "Beware of dragon," a nod to my garden sculpture. I even added a tiny disclaimer at the bottom, "Violators will be mocked mercilessly." Humor was important, it kept me sane, and I hoped made any potential inspector second-guess their life choices. Then I turned to my creative arsenal. I planted oversized sunflowers along the edge of the property, each facing outward like a row of sentinels, watching the world and, importantly, Karen. I rigged a small speaker to play a loop of seagull noises because nothing says wild and untouchable like 24/7 bird chaos. The next morning, I noticed something odd. The street was quieter than usual. Cars slowed down, neighbors peered out from behind curtains. Word had spread, the man outside the HOA wasn't just living there, he was preparing. That's when Karen herself appeared in my dreams at first, then in emails and phone calls. Her tone was clinical, almost surgical. "We're monitoring compliance. You are still subject to our rules, you must blah blah blah." Each word fueled a growing fire inside me. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was flexing power, showing off control. I decided it was time for the first real counterattack, and it had to be subtle but memorable. The next day, I left a gift on her doorstep, a hand-painted neighborhood freedom banner complete with a tiny dragon flying over neon rooftops. The note read, "For inspiration from your friendly rebel." I didn't know what to expect, a phone call, a citation, maybe a personal visit. What came instead was something I didn't anticipate, an anonymous tip that my neighbors were talking. Apparently my banner had sparked curiosity, gossip, and mild panic. Some were whispering, "He's insane, but kind of brilliant." Then came the legal letter. Karen's trademark move, vague threats, phrases like "subject to all applicable rules and penalties may apply." But I noticed something funny, there was no law backing them outside HOA boundaries. That was the first real crack in their armor, and I intended to exploit it. So I escalated creatively. I painted a life-size pirate figure holding a scroll that read, "No Karen may board here," right next to my driveway. Every time inspectors walked past, it looked like a statue giving them the stink eye. My dog, of course, approved. The tension escalated further when one of the clipboard inspectors returned, suspiciously timing their visits. They lingered near my pirate ship, scribbling notes. I waved cheerfully. Nice weather, huh? They didn't respond. I waved again, still nothing. That's when I realized they were trying to psych me out. I laughed, a full, unrestrained laugh loud enough to echo across the street. I realized at that moment how absurd this whole thing was. A group of adults taking a man to task over flowers, paint, and dragons, but beneath the humor I felt a surge of power. This wasn't just my property, this was my statement. By the evening my countermeasures were in place, each one a subtle but unmistakable middle finger to the HOA's authority. And I waited, sipping coffee, watching the sunset. I knew it wouldn't be long before Karen struck back, but I also knew I was ready. Every move I made was carefully calculated, chaotic, yes, but deliberate. As darkness fell and the stars appeared, I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning, Karen. You've poked the wrong homeowner. You wanted compliance, control, and fear. What you're going to get is war." And in the shadows of my neon paradise, I knew she wouldn't stop until she tried, but neither would I. By the time I woke up that morning, it was clear my little rebellion had made waves. I stepped outside to find the neighborhood buzzing, whispers drifting from behind curtains, eyes peering over fences, and the occasional cautious wave. Some neighbors looked terrified, clutching their HOA newsletters as if they were shields. Others smiled secretly like they were part of some inside joke. I suddenly realized I wasn't alone in this war. I walked down the gravel path to say hello to Mr. Thompson, my neighbor across the street. He looked like a man who had seen too many HOA horror stories unfold and survived, just barely. "You've stirred the hornet's nest," he said, shaking his head. "She's relentless." "I know," I replied with a grin, "but at least it's an entertaining hornet's nest." We shared a laugh, though I could tell he was genuinely worried. That's when I noticed something peculiar, a van slowly circling the block. Its windows were tinted, and I could almost imagine Karen herself inside, magnifying glass in hand, calculating my every move. It was official, the neighborhood was divided, and the division wasn't subtle. On one side, people whispered about my insanity, my dangerous pirate ship, and the dragon in the garden. On the other, people nodded in quiet approval, murmuring about freedom and living life without fear of fines. I realized then that my little war was bigger than me, it had become a symbol. Later that day, as I was fixing a loose plank on my pirate ship, I heard the unmistakable crunch of heels on gravel. I looked up. Karen in the flesh, and she was furious. "Good afternoon," I said cheerfully, trying to mask the sudden tension in my chest. "What brings you to my humble paradise?" Her eyes narrowed, scanning the chaos that was my yard. "I'm here to address the violations personally," she said, voice sharp and clipped, the kind that could cut through steel. "Your decorations, your landscaping, your behavior, it's unacceptable. You will comply." I laughed softly. "I see, so this is a personal visit. How charming." Karen didn't smile. She walked closer, pointing at the pirate ship. "You think this is freedom? This is disorder. You are causing distress to neighbors. This stops now." "Distress," I repeated, mock horror in my voice. "Karen, I'm just living my life. The pirate ship is educational, the dragon is inspirational, and the neon shutters, artistic expression." She narrowed her eyes. "Artistic expression does not exempt you from rules." That's when I realized something important. Karen believed she could control everything, and she thought fear was her strongest weapon. I decided to turn the tables. "You know, Karen," I said, lowering my voice conspiratorially, "some of your neighbors actually admire what I've done. They think it's brave." Her eyes flickered, a micro-expression almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Doubt. For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. Over the next few hours, whispers spread like wildfire. I overheard conversations behind fences. "He's bold, he's funny, maybe we should help him." A few brave souls even waved as they passed by, subtle signs of silent alliance. And that's when the idea hit me, alliances matter. If Karen wanted a war, she'd have to fight not just me, but the subtle forces of rebellion quietly brewing around the neighborhood. By evening, my yard looked more like a fortress than ever. The pirate ship stood tall, the dragon's wings caught the last rays of the sun, and the sunflower sentinels faced outward, ready for any HOA advance. I poured a glass of wine, sat on my porch, and smiled. Karen may have had the power of rules, letters, and inspectors, but I had something stronger: creativity, courage, and the quiet support of a few brave neighbors. As darkness fell and the streetlights flickered on, I whispered to myself, "This isn't just my fight anymore. Karen has poked the wrong hive, and she's about to see what happens when people decide to fight back." The war lines were drawn, and tomorrow I would strike again, clever, humorous, and unforgettable. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for Karen to make her next move. She had shown up in person, seen my pirate ship, my dragon, my neon shutters, and she thought she could intimidate me. Big mistake. I began my first real escalation, not reckless, not chaotic, strategic chaos. I planted oversized private property signs along the perimeter, each one painted with more flair than the last. One read, "Trespassers will be mocked, seriously." Another warned, "HOA enforcers, beware of dragon." The absurdity made me chuckle, but I knew the visual impact would be unforgettable. Next, I turned my garden into a fortress. The sunflowers, already facing outward like vigilant sentinels, now had a new addition: tiny reflectors that glinted whenever the morning sun hit them, dazzling anyone who dared walk near my property line. And the pirate ship, I rigged it with a small speaker playing the faint sounds of cannon fire and ocean waves, just in case Karen thought she could march in without feeling a little drama. I could already hear the whispers from neighbors. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. The street had transformed from a quiet neighborhood into a stage for what I jokingly began calling the HOA showdown. But then the first retaliation came, and it wasn't subtle. A letter, more threatening than any before, appeared in my mailbox. Karen's handwriting wasn't elegant, it was sharp, almost like a dagger on paper. "Cease all non-compliant activities immediately, or fines and legal action will follow." I laughed aloud. Legal action? I'd studied the HOA bylaws. Outside boundaries meant outside control. But Karen didn't know that, and I decided to have a little fun letting her assume she had the upper hand. The next day, I spotted another inspector near the property line, scribbling furiously in his notebook. I waved. "Hello again, careful with the dragon." He looked up, startled, then scowled, clearly unprepared for my cheeky defiance. I decided it was time for my first public counter-strike. I painted a life-size figure of a pirate holding a scroll. "No Karen may board here." Placed strategically by the driveway, it was impossible to miss. Every time someone approached, it looked like a miniature rebellion army was standing guard. And the neighbors, oh, they were taking notes. Kids pointed and laughed, adults whispered about my bravery, and a few of the more daring ones even left small notes of encouragement. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was a neighborhood morale booster. But Karen was relentless. That afternoon, her minions, two new inspectors in sharp uniforms, appeared at my property trying to intimidate me with their presence. One tapped a tape measure against my fence, as if timing some imaginary violation. I smiled. "You're doing a wonderful job, gentlemen. Would you like a lemonade while you measure?" They didn't smile back. That's when I realized the psychological warfare had begun. Every letter, every visit, every measuring tape was an attempt to break me. But instead, it fueled my creativity, my humor, my determination. By evening, I felt a surge of satisfaction. My defenses were in place, my message was clear, and my statement was undeniable. I would not back down. Karen thought she was running a neighborhood, I was running a rebellion. And in this small corner of suburbia, that made all the difference. As I sat on my porch, sipping a well-earned glass of wine and watching the sunset reflect off the dragon's wings, I whispered to myself, "This isn't just my fight, it's our fight." And Karen has no idea the storm she's started. The battle lines were officially drawn. Tomorrow, I knew the HOA would escalate, but so would I. This was no longer a game of letters and threats. It was a war of creativity, strategy, and stubbornness. And I intended to win. I thought I was prepared, I really did. I had my pirate ship, my dragon, my sunflowers acting like sentinels, and my life-size pirate warning the HOA to stay out. But I quickly learned that Karen had leveled up. It started with a letter, crisp and official-looking, addressed not to me but to all parties concerned. The envelope smelled faintly of power and intimidation. Inside, the words were even more menacing than before: HOA legal counsel retained, immediate compliance required, failure to do so will result in court action. I blinked, I read it again, legal counsel, court action. My coffee went cold in my hand as a thrill of adrenaline ran through me. This was real now. The first strikes had been inspections and letters, now the war had escalated. I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Thompson. "It's happening," I whispered. "Karen's lawyer is involved." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I warned you, once you poke the HOA hive, they don't stop, they're relentless. But you're not backing down, right?" "Never," I replied, a grin creeping onto my face despite the tension. "I've got a strategy, a chaotic, brilliant strategy." By late morning, I spotted the black SUV again. Two men in suits stepped out, obviously lawyers or paralegals sent to observe. They didn't speak. They didn't smile. They merely looked at my pirate ship, the dragon, the sunflowers, and scribbled furiously. I waved cheerfully, they didn't wave back. I realized something in that moment. They thought fear was their weapon, and I was about to turn that weapon into comedy. First, I decided to document everything, every inspection, every visit, every letter. Photographs, videos, notes, all cataloged. If Karen wanted a war, I'd show her how it was done legally, humorously, and theatrically. Then came my first strategic strike. I printed flyers titled "Freedom Lives Here," with images of my yard, pirate ship, dragon, and witty captions about HOA overreach. I discreetly slipped them under doors of sympathetic neighbors. By afternoon, I noticed more people glancing at my property with smiles, pointing, whispering. The whispers were no longer just gossip, they were alliances forming in secret. Karen's minions were relentless, though. Later that evening, 2 inspectors came to measure the height of my sunflowers. I greeted them warmly. Testing their compliance, are we? Watch out, 1 more inch and the dragon might attack. I laughed at my own joke. They did not. Clearly, humor was wasted on them. That night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, I could hear the tension humming in the neighborhood. Every shadow felt like a potential spy, every car slowing down might be another HOA agent. But I felt alive, exhilarated even. This was no longer just about property or dues. This was about freedom, creativity, and refusing to bow to petty power. The next day, I got a phone call from Karen herself. She sounded sharp, practiced, full of that familiar superiority. "Your antics are no longer amusing," she said. "I expect compliance by the end of the week. The lawyer has been instructed to proceed if you do not cooperate." I grinned. "Karen, do you know what's amusing? Watching a dragon scare off 2 grown adults in suits. And yes, I'll be here every day, unmoved, unbothered, and slightly entertained." She didn't reply. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, frustrated that she couldn't intimidate me. By nightfall, I walked around my property, surveying my defenses. The pirate ship gleaming in the moonlight, dragon wings catching the last glow of the streetlights, sunflowers standing tall. I whispered to myself, "They think they can scare me. They think this is a battle they can win. They have no idea." And then the thought hit me. The war wasn't just about me anymore. Neighbors were watching, the rumors were spreading, and I had become a symbol of rebellion. Karen might have legal backing, inspectors, letters, and lawyers, but I had creativity, audacity, and the quiet support of a neighborhood ready to cheer the underdog. Tomorrow, I knew the war would escalate again, but I also knew I was ready. Every visit, every letter, every measuring tape only fueled my determination. Karen thought she could push me to the brink. Instead, she had awakened the rebel inside me fully. The war was no longer hypothetical. It had begun in earnest, and I was prepared to fight with brains, humor, and a dragon statue. By now, it was clear Karen had underestimated me. She thought her letters, inspections, and lawyers could scare me into compliance. But each move she made only gave me more ammunition, not in the legal sense, though that came later, but in the psychological, humorous, and utterly chaotic sense. I spent that morning walking my yard like a general surveying a battlefield. The pirate ship stood proudly at the edge, the dragon's wings caught the sun like a warning, and the sunflowers faced outward like vigilant guards. Every inch of my property screamed, I was not backing down. And then it hit me, the turning point. Karen was so obsessed with control that she had become predictable. Every letter, every inspection, every visit followed the same pattern. If I could anticipate her moves, I could flip the battle entirely. My first action was subtle but brilliant. I documented everything: photos of inspectors measuring my dragon, videos of them tiptoeing past my pirate ship, copies of every threatening letter and email. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was creating a narrative, a story that showed just how absurdly extreme the HOA's tactics had become. Next, I went public subtly. A carefully worded post on a neighborhood forum highlighting my experience, my creative yard, and the overreach of the HOA. I didn't name names at first, just painted a picture. Sometimes rules are meant to protect, not control. Sometimes freedom is worth defending. Within hours, neighbors were commenting, asking questions, sharing their own stories of petty fines and ridiculous inspections. My rebellion had inspired others. By afternoon, Karen made a misstep. She sent an unscheduled visit, clearly hopping to catch me off guard, but I was ready. The pirate ship's cannons, a cleverly rigged sound system, roared as she stepped onto the property, startling her assistant. The dragon's wings shimmered menacingly in the sun, sunflowers seemed to lean forward in unison, and I emerged from behind a hedge, coffee mug in hand, smiling. "Welcome to my kingdom," I said cheerfully. "I trust the dragon warned you." Karen froze, her composure slipping for the first time. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I could see the gears turning, realizing she couldn't intimidate me with fear alone anymore. Her confidence was cracking. I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You wanted compliance, you wanted fear, but what you're getting is proof that overreach can backfire. She stormed off, leaving her assistants behind, scribbling notes frantically. I watched, a sly grin spreading across my face. The battle was turning. Karen was no longer in complete control. I had shifted the momentum. That evening, I reviewed my documentation again. Every letter, every visit, every misstep Karen made was now part of a larger strategy. I realized that I could not only defend myself legally if she escalated further, but also expose the absurdity of her obsession to the wider neighborhood. Humor remained my secret weapon. I rigged small surprises, a hidden speaker playing dramatic music when inspectors approached, new signs with exaggerated warnings, subtle pranks that made their jobs feel ridiculous. Each act was carefully designed to chip away at the aura of fear Karen tried to maintain. By nightfall, I sat on my porch, sipping a glass of wine and watching my little kingdom glow in the soft evening light. I whispered to myself, this war was supposed to be theirs to win, but I turned the tide. Karen thought she could scare me, intimidate me, control me, but she didn't realize she was the one walking into my battlefield. The turning point wasn't just about my yard, my pirate ship, or my dragon. It was about courage, creativity, and the refusal to bow to petty authority. And the best part, the neighbors were noticing. The whispers were louder, the nods of support more obvious. Karen's power wasn't absolute anymore. She was losing influence over the very people she claimed to protect. Tomorrow, I knew, the final act of this war would begin. The stage was set. Karen would have to either escalate one last time or accept defeat, but I was ready. Every detail, every move, every ounce of strategy was in place. The war had reached a critical turning point, and for the first time, I truly felt like I was winning. The morning felt electric. I could sense it, the culmination of weeks of letters, inspections, warnings, and carefully orchestrated chaos. Today it would all come to a head. My pirate ship gleamed in the sunlight, the dragon's wings shimmered like a warning flag, and the sunflowers stood taller than ever, facing outward like silent sentinels ready for battle. I had prepared, every inspection had been documented, every letter scanned, every minor prank and clever diversion noted. My little rebellion had become a well-oiled operation. And I knew that today, Karen would come again one last time, hopping to assert dominance and finally make me comply. Sure enough, by mid-morning, the familiar black SUV rolled slowly down the street. But this time, Karen was not alone. She had her lawyer, 2 inspectors, and a clipboard army in tow. I sipped my coffee, smiling to myself, the calm before the storm. Karen stepped onto my property, her face a mixture of anger, frustration, and disbelief. This ends today, she declared, like a general delivering a death sentence. You will comply, pay the dues, or face legal consequences. I set down my mug and walked forward. Karen, do you see what you've started? I said, gesturing at the pirate ship, the dragon, the sunflowers, even the cleverly rigged cannon sound system. This isn't about dues, it's about overreach, about control, about creativity. Her lawyer shifted nervously. The inspectors scribbled in their notebooks, unsure if this was a violation or a public comedy show. I smiled. The tide had already turned. Your letters, your visits, they're documented, I continued. Every attempt to intimidate me has been recorded, and let me tell you something, the neighbors are watching. They're taking notes too. You might have rules, Karen, but your power relies on fear. And fear evaporates when people see absurdity and audacity collide. Karen's face flushed. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. No need, the story speaks for itself. Then came the most satisfying moment. A crowd of neighbors began emerging from behind fences, curiously but confidently. A few waved, a few nodded. Some held small signs of support, jokingly referencing my pirate ship and dragon. Karen's eyes widened. Her aura of absolute authority cracked further. Her lawyer whispered something urgently. I didn't care, the moment was mine. I could feel the momentum shift entirely. Karen realized that she was losing. I took a step closer. I've lived outside your HOA rules from day one. You've tried inspections, letters, threats, none of it worked. And now, I gestured at the pirates, the dragon, the sentinels, now the neighborhood sees the truth. Karen's hands trembled slightly as she folded her clipboard. Ka, she stammered, words failed her. I smiled, satisfied, I guess I just can. By noon, the confrontation ended. Karen and her entourage retreated, papers clutched like shields, egos bruised, and pride deflated. I stood on my porch, surveying my little kingdom victorious, unbroken, and thoroughly entertained. The pirate ship creaked in the wind, the dragon glowed in the afternoon sun, and the sunflowers nodded as if approvingly. The neighborhood buzzed with excitement. A few brave neighbors approached, congratulating me quietly. "We knew you, Win," one whispered. "We were just waiting to see how." I chuckled. It wasn't just me, it was all of us who refused to bow to ridiculous rules. And then I finally allowed myself to laugh freely. Weeks of tension, inspections, threats, and letters evaporated in a single triumphant moment. I had won not just my freedom, but the admiration, secret or otherwise, of the neighborhood. That evening, I sat back with a glass of wine, the dragon perched like a guardian beside me, and whispered to myself. I lived outside the rules, outside the fear, and outside the HOA. They tried to take me down, but all they did was give me a story worth telling. The war was over. The pirate ship, dragon, and neon shutters remained untouched. Karen's threats were now a funny story for the neighborhood, whispered behind fences with giggles and knowing smiles. And me, I was finally free to live exactly how I wanted, colorful, chaotic, audacious, and completely unstoppable. Sometimes I still see a black SUV driving slowly down the street and I smile. Karen might still be out there plotting her next move. But one thing is certain, the neighborhood learned that audacity beats intimidation, creativity beats fear, and sometimes a pirate ship in the yard is the ultimate weapon. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.